want to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Krystal Hayes. She's the mom of Haley, right over here up front. And Haley's a Pompe patient. And we all know how hard it is to have the diagnosis of Pompe and to integrate it into our lives. And Krystal's going to talk about how they live with Pompe. So here's Krystal.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm really short, so you might not can see me. So when I was first asked to speak, I kind of had some thoughts in my head of how I would start the speak or the talk. And then last night after that video, I was really just sitting there. If you saw it, I was really kind of blown away by just the history and all the research and things like that. I was sitting there with Haley, who's 9, next to me eating guacamole with a spoon and seeing these videos and these, life expectancies and things that, I'm so busy sometimes in everyday life that I don't even sometimes realize that. So seeing that last night was just amazing. And I'd just like to thank the AMDA and the House family and all of the medical people that pretty much made research and the treatment a possibility. So I thank you right now. So also, when figuring out what I was going to say when they asked me what I speak, I could think about different things I wanted to say and all these pictures and videos I've taken over the last 9 years to go with it. I realized I had probably about 20,000 pictures and videos, so that with working a full schedule and 2 busy kids, I didn't have as much time as I hoped to look through and get it, all the bullets and the pretty stuff like I wanted. And I didn't practice it, so we could go through this in 5 minutes or maybe 30. So I've had a lot of coffee, so it might be 5, okay? Let me see what I'm going to do next. Okay. So living a normal, and I put normal in that, and most of you that have Pompe or been around it know what that normal is. It's not really normal. And then I put my credentials at the bottom. I am an RN with my bachelor's. I have a few other certification credentials that could fit behind there, but the ... basically when the diagnosis of Pompe came up in 2006, it pretty much became a Pompe mom. I had no clue what Pompe was. The other doctors in our area had no clue what Pompe was, so it kind of became forget all the other stuff and become a Pompe mom. So this is Haley. That was in 2006, May, which is a month before, actually a week before she was diagnosed, on the left with her sister Brittany. Basically, she wasn't gaining enough weight, and she was not eating very well. We thought she was a colicky child, and she was going through different milks, and even resulted to a chiropractor just to see if that would help the colic. And I thought her arch was high. All these things. I'm like, this is why she's not gaining weight. So we followed her about 2 months. The pediatrician, or actually the general practitioner I was taking her to, we checked her weight weekly. She always gained just enough to say, okay, come back next week and we'll check it. So eventually the first week of June, right after that picture, they did some blood work to see what was going on, and a lot of her levels came back really elevated. Sent us to the hospital about an hour and a half away. And there, about a week later, a few days later, we found out she had the heart involvement, very thick, very enlarged, 3 times a large heart, and stayed there for 32 days. After that, she went to congestive heart failure twice from all the fluids that we were pumping in her. And so that was kind of how it started for us. So we got home, and it was like I was standing there feeling like I was running in circles. Like we had new meds, new tube feedings, like 4 or 5 heart medications, breathing treatments, everything else. And so I felt like it was pretty crazy. So 9 years later, fast forward a little bit, still has infusions. She has weekly appointments, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, and everyday life. So I've tried my best over the years to make it a point to just have a normal life, whatever that normal means. Here's a few more pictures of her in the hospital. Top left is in PICU when she first saw her sister Brittany for the first time in probably a couple weeks, and my husband down here who couldn't come. And so that was her diagnosis in 2006. So I put this is very odd, I know, it's a washing machine. The reason is I was in making a statement years ago. I said something about life is normal right now, or it's in a normal week or something, and someone reminded me this. normal, hashtag, I've said hashtag quotes, air quotes, is just a setting on the washing machine. And so that's pretty much how you can refer to normal. Other than that, it's nothing, it means nothing besides to a washing machine, I think. So I'm going to first begin with the school system, just because this is something that over the years can be really easy or really hard. For us, it's been fairly easy. And so all of these things I'm talking about are the tips that I've found over the years that were helpful for our family, or considerations to make or think about as if you have a child that has Pompe, or even if you have adult. I know the school part won't fall into place, but maybe later on something will. So we have IEPs in school. It's like an individual education plan. And so with that, basically, with Haley and her school, nobody had really fit in her description before. So it was either you were in the main class or you were in the other disabled class, and you usually didn't have the intellectual component of learning. So for her, she kind of paved the way of the school and fit in the middle. So we knew right away, because she was very smart, that she would go into a main class. She would have other issues that she would need to go out for, like speech therapy and things like that. But getting an IEP is something that in the 504, more of a medical plan. So if you have things like tube feedings, medicines, things like that, or need longer to take a test, things like that are there for the school. So the reason the school system actually came into the picture when Haley was 2.5 years old, and I was blown away by her being 2.5 and thinking about going to school. She was getting in-home physical therapy and things like that, and because of early intervention in our state of Virginia, she had to transition to the school system and get those services. And so they mentioned bringing her to school, and I was like, of course not, we're not taking her to school. Well, I found out who her teacher was going to be, and it was a good family friend, and she really had not had that social interaction with people her age. And so I, decided that we'd do about 2 or 3 days a week for a couple hours a day, and then during that time, she'd get speech therapy, occupational therapy, even physical therapy. When she went to school, she was almost 3, and she was not really verbal at all. She used some sign language, some that was official and some that she made up on her own. And I had to teach the teacher how to do that, what she was meaning. But a couple months after that, she really started to drop the signs and add the words into what she was saying. So that's kind of when we started school, almost 3. Another school issue is playgrounds. So this can be a difficult issue. It's a lot of time spent on the playgrounds for kids, and I think starting early, if they start in kindergarten or before, like Haley did, is talking with the physician. I talked to too many doctors. Talking with the principal about trying to incorporate maybe a high school or community involved with building like an accessible playground. That's something that we've been trying over the years. It hasn't happened as quick as I'd like. And she'll be out of the elementary school soon. But that's something I think you should make a note of early on, because someone will benefit after that child leaves. And those high school students need projects, woodworking, whatever they need to do. It can kind of incorporate them. This is her. This picture is her in the playground, and she just decided, I'm going to sit here, and this is my ice cream parlor, and the kid's going to come up and order chocolate chip ice cream. And so all the kids swarmed to her some of the days I'd go and watch during playtime, and that was what she did during playtime. Now, sometimes she misses a lot of school for infusions and being sick, so a lot of times she stays inside and does different tests and makeup work at this point. But finding different ways to adapt to times that she might not be able to get carried down the slide like she was when she was 3. But field trips, so they can be fun or not so fun. They, it depends on where it's to. So if it's not to anywhere really fun, then make it a fun day and do something else. So the peers, I think it's important early on in school to either talk to different classes, especially as they get older and understand more, and have like a PowerPoint or a video showing the kids basically that she likes to get online, she likes to Skype, she likes to watch TV. Explain a little bit about the disease, but showing them that she's pretty much exactly like them. That way they're not sitting there going, staring at them and not understanding what's going on. They see them as a kid just like any other kid. So And I think her personality's had a lot to do with her making really good friends in school and keeping them. I mean, I know some kids won't be as outspoken and talkative as she is, but they can be taught early on to, say hi. Like if a kid's staring at them, say hi. Don't just sit there and, feel embarrassed because they're staring. Say hi or introduce themselves. And that's where she usually starts talking to people, and I think it changes their perception. She also has a one-on-one. I popped that up there. That can be done in the 504 IEP plan. And that person basically stays with her all day long and takes her to the bathroom, helps her with like if she needs to take a cap off and is not able to, or anything like that. Let's see what's next. So another thing Haley loves to do is swimming. So it's great therapy, of course, because you use a lot of muscles. It's something that she's been doing for a long time, since she was a baby. She could swim for probably 6-8 hours at a time and not get tired of it. So she said, no, I don't want to get out. She will, even if we decide we're not swimming, she will swim to the middle of the pool, and I don't have my bathing suit on, and she'll be like, haha, you're not going to get me out. So she's found out ways around that. It's good exercise. It's a good place to stretch. She hates to be stretched, and we honestly have been so busy we don't stretch a lot, so I try to make a point when she's in the pool, kind of bribe them a little bit. Shh. You're in the pool, let's stretch a little bit, then you can play a little bit. And so that's helped a lot. Certain depths of pools or lakes or beaches, oceans, she can actually touch the bottom, and she's not able to walk right now, but she can touch the bottom, bear weight. She's even, I'll show you a video in a second, started able to use the life jacket. She has the life jacket on in the right picture. She's always used a life jacket, but this year she's learned how to float. And so over the summer, we've swam a lot this summer, and she's went from like 5 seconds when we first took the life jacket off, I almost, got nervous, but she's went up to, I don't know, a minute or two with just laying like that and floating. And then she grabbed a snorkel this summer and put that on and is trying to learn how to do that. So that's a picture of her. Let's see if I can get this. That's my sister helping her snorkel. And that's her basically with her life jacket on, kicking her legs back. And let me play it one more time because I know it's really short. Using the, trying to keep the tip of the, if y'all snorkeled, I'd put the tip in, so you got to watch out for that part. And then this is, oh, that's the same thing. Okay. This is the lazy river this summer, and she had no life jacket on. And I let go of her. She was stepping on the bottom and walking the lazy river with her head back. So that's using a lot of muscles, and she had fun. I had to stay nearby, though. I didn't move her side because I did catch her a few times if she started going under. Oh, let me go back. All right, so next is something we do a lot is fish. We live near a lake. We live 2 hours from the beach and near a bunch of ponds, so we're out in the country. Fishing is something that we can take her on the dock, either just in some of her wheelchairs. We can roll right on the dock, and it uses a lot of good physical therapy and OT using to hold a fishing rod or even reel it in. We may have to help her if a big fish gets on there, but we've even strapped her wheelchair in the back of a boat and went deep sea fishing right there at the bottom right, and we kept catching the mean oyster toads that we didn't like. So this is just a quick video, I think of her reeling, using the fishing rod and turning it. So good OT involved with that. All right, let's see what's next. So other adventures that we like to do, we like to go to the zoo. This is her power wheelchair we didn't bring because it was 300 pounds, and they probably about $60,000, and they broke her other chair around the airline, so I'm not bringing that one anywhere. She'll go around the zoo. We got a little umbrella that we'll put on sometimes and keep the sun off of her. That wheelchair can go up and down, so it can change levels, so she can get right up to that little monkey and raise up, come down. So finding things like that that's easy for her to do. And things with the zoo is, I know going to the zoo and theme parks can be expensive, but many parents and family want to know, or family and friends want to know what to get your child for Christmas or birthdays. So think about things, because we have too many toys. So think about things like the zoo and parks. They can get season tickets to things like that they can go out and adventure. So we love going to the beach, but the beach can be frustrating because we carry her to the beach usually if it's not accessible. So finding beaches online that are accessible or have ramps to get to the beach pretty well. Many will have a beach wheelchair, like those 2 different beaches that you can rent out. I didn't even think about it this summer, but the hotel we went to had one, and we kept taking it up to her hotel room and pushed her straight onto the beach. So always check your hotel. They have that's an adult one, I'm pretty sure. And we just pushed her right out, and there we go. And we also, in the past, have put pools, take a little inflatable baby pool and get a bucket and sit on the pool, since she would go out and jump in the waves all day. But, if you have a pool, something to do there, that's fun for her to do. We try to find accessible playgrounds at Virginia Beach, and there's some all over, I'm sure. But just ones that she can actually get on and, do a few things with. And you can look online to find where may be your nearest accessible playground. That's a few things, good OT, PT, all that stuff. We love taking adventures, so this summer we went to Disney. We could only afford one day. No, Disney is expensive. I don't know if y'all have looked at Disney, but you better. That'd be the only trip you take for a long time. So yeah, we made one day at Magic Kingdom and literally stayed there for 15 hours. Yeah, that was a fun place, and that's we like other parks as well, but that's a really good accessible place. And that as well, families, friends, if they're looking for something for Christmas, Disney tickets. We like taking Haley to camps. This camp was just brought up a couple years ago, and it's called Victory Junction Camp, but other places may have camps that are more for people with disabilities or any other issues that doesn't have to be just a disability. So this one's called Victory Junction. They have weeks during the summer for different specific illnesses. So she could go during the physical disabilities week or the genetic week. So it's all kids there that are basically there for the same reasons like she is. There's a family weekend too, so we ended up going for the family weekend, and she was able to ride a horse for the first time there. And she painted her hair. They have a little archery thing that they have set up, normal ones, but then also ones that are a little easier for her to do. So she was able to, I think you hit the balloon. Did you hit the balloon? I think at some point you did. So just checking to see if there's camps nearby that you can go to. Her sister painted her whole head red, so we had fun with the paint. We enjoy going to concerts. Again, Christmas gifts, birthday gifts. If someone just wants to give you something, say, I want to go to a concert. So we try to, get the accessible seats, or I've been known to carry her down the whole thing to get her front row. But a couple different concerts that we've had fun at. At the top middle is her singing during a local Christmas concert. She was singing Frozen with a friend that we know. And let's see. Hanging with friends. So this is our friend Brittany Marie. She's an upcoming country music star, and we kind of got wind of her when she was at a radio station for something, and we were at a radio station promoting something else. So they've become good friends ever since, and she actually gets her to come to some of her concerts in the top right and sing songs with her. And so she loves it. The crowd loves it. Everybody loves it. So it's fun. And then this kind of leads into Haley's Make-A-Wish. So many of y'all know about the Make-A-Wish organization. We were fortunate enough this year, Haley was able to do her Make-A-Wish. And it's not just Make-A-Wish. There's other state organizations that have wish granting capabilities. So it doesn't have to be just Make-A-Wish. But she decided she wanted to go to the ACM Country Music Awards. We thought it was going to be a couple years off, and she'd have more time to think about it to see if she was going to be a little older and change her mind. She really wanted to meet Carrie Underwood and go to the awards, but they kind of couldn't. You had to pick one or the other. Well, we thought Carrie Underwood always goes there, but she didn't go this year. So But we met lots of great people, all the country artists pretty much. Even the middle one's not a country artist, Steven Tyler, so from Erasmus. So my husband was the grinning about that one. So. Yeah. All right, so that's Make-A-Wish. So, it's just thinking about if you have a child, when you would want to do that, and kind of, it's a big decision on what to do, but be thinking about that, and it was really a fun time. Got to order room service and all that fun stuff. Here's some pictures from there. It's on the red carpet. She met everybody. Lots of pictures. I think one more. But different people took pictures and were tweeting about Haley being the prettiest girl there, which is definitely true. So that was fun. Yes, it was. See if I can go. All right, so next I'm going to talk about adapting. Let me check my time. I better hurry up. So over the years, we've had to definitely adapt, and these are just a few reasons or ways how. So putt-putting, we just go right on the greens, or put her down, sit her down on the little turf and let her hit the ball in. When she was younger, she could sit on the pool table and just hit the balls in. And then that's Chuck E. Cheese. So, it's different games there she could play. But be careful, have your hand sanitizer wipes. There's a lot of kids at Chuck E. Cheese. But so another way we kind of adapted, our church actually built this playhouse for Haley a couple years ago. And she wanted it purple. And this is her and my nephew, Patrick. And she wanted to do a drive-through, so she stays on the inside. He drives around in her Barbie car, and they do a drive-through transaction. So these are different Haley equipments that we have. Why am I looking up there? I have it in front of me. Oh my gosh, my neck's gonna hurt. Okay, so special equipment that we have, and it's really about making it fun. Equipment's never something that she really asked to get in. So trying to find ways over the years. Top left is her playing rock band, so that got her in it for a little bit. Her makeup looks bad, she said, but she was doing her own makeup in the bottom one with her tray. That's in her stander. We were at Target on the middle one where she was in her stander. It's an electric stander, so she could power that around. And then the right one is called a kid walk, and so it's a walker, stander kind of combination, and she was doing one of the Dance Central games, so she was dancing to that. This is her on the treadmill, on the walker on the left, singing karaoke in the middle on her walk stander, and then on her on the right is her in some long leg braces, so that allows her to stand up, stretch her hips a little bit, and be able to do something fun. And it brings to mind the toys. So a lot of toys are hard for kids, especially with limited mobility and strength. And we had a kitchen. I don't have the picture on here, but when she was younger, we got one of those kitchens that says "Grow with Me." So it kind of started out low, and then you could pop it up. She's used that thing for years because she could sit down and actually play kitchen and then pop it up if we needed to. So just looking for toys that adapt really well. That's her trike on the left. She likes to bike, and if she has a friend, she'll hold her hand. A cousin, sorry. The right is her long leg braces during therapy, during her infusion. We were trying them out. They help keep her stretched. Like I said, stretching's not something we do as often as we probably should, but she had to have surgery a couple years ago to help loosen those muscles. So, I think staying early on with this equipment and stretching is really important, and trying to make it fun so they actually want to do it. And then the middle is just them playing a Jenga game, so good OT, finding games that work really good for, your OT or any other things like that. That's her in her wheelchair. So she got that wheelchair when she was, I think it was like 3.5. And so at first I'm like, her drive a wheelchair? Really? I think I told Laura that, like, are you kidding me? Well, that was the same day we got it. She was driving, picking flowers. That one goes all the way down to the floor so she could get in and out of it easily. And raises up high like you saw in the other picture. And just, they can learn a joystick really early on. So I think she goes so fast that I have to jog to keep up with her. So she's a speed demon. So these are some casting that we had to do, and just some cute little pictures of when she was little and had those chubby cheeks. So a few tips that I have that I thought about when they asked me to speak. So I think educating yourself about the disease is important. You don't have to be an expert or know everything about the Pompe disease, but know where to find the information, like in protocols and guidelines, because you can point your doctors that may not know or have heard of Pompe disease into that direction. And if they don't listen, then you find another doctor. You can, let's see, some doctors and teams may not be as familiar, and I've talked to many parents, so I think educating to know what tests should have already been done as a child, even as an adult. Some people have never heard of, the swallow studies as kids need to usually do, and things like the cough assist machine, and many parents had never heard of that. So just seeing the guidelines and knowing what should have been evaluated is really important and can prevent a lot of illness. Be a part of the Pompe community, so whether you email or talk to others that have the same issues or similar issues is important. If you're on Facebook, there's tons of groups on Facebook. I actually started one years back called Cure Pompe Disease, but that was first started more for awareness for friends and families to learn more about the disease. I think Facebook made a few changes and we lost a lot of our members, but now it seems like it's more for people, it's still for awareness, but people have questions related to their adult or children issues, then they can ask them, and maybe someone else has had that similar issue and can help with that. Let's see. Next, find a work schedule that works for your family. So some people usually ask, how do you do it all? Well, sometimes I don't know that, but in the beginning when Haley was diagnosed and born, I had a work job where I only worked weekends. So I was off Monday through Saturday, which helped, or through Saturday night. So I had all week to go to infusions, PT, all that stuff. Not too long after that, I got laid off for that position because they closed down. And so I had to look for other things, but I looked for work at home work and part-time PRN work where I can make my own schedule. So I think that's really important, is finding what you can to adapt to the crazy lifestyle that you're going to have or that you have. I've also started a home-based business that can work from your phone. So things like that. There's a lot of stuff out there if you really look into it. Let's see, finding a good support system. So many people might not have family and friends nearby them or in the picture, but find people through the communities, Pompe communities online, and if you do have friends and family that are there, they usually want to help you, and they, in the beginning, will say, how can we help? And it's easy to say, I'm good, I'm fine, because you don't really know what you want. I think they just bite the bullet and say, bring me dinner like once a week or something like that. It's really, really helpful. Come wash dishes, say things because they really do want to help. It makes them feel better, and it helps you a whole lot. But don't say I'll call you, or they'll say let me know. Just go give them something, because they want to help you. Let's see what else I wrote down. Sorry. Let's see. So stay strong. I think it's important. We stay busy, so I think that's one reason that I just don't. If I sat at home all day and all week, we'd be like, oh, woe is me, or this stinks. But we stay busy and go do things, and I think that helps a lot. Sometimes too busy, but I'm used to that. So, what else was I going to say with that? Anyway, you're not alone. Other people are out there that can help you. We've used along the years, our faith has been a big issue, and I think without that it would be hard for me to get through things, so finding something like that to you may help. And this, I kind of popped this in at the end because I forgot these pictures, but this is a dance marathon Haley went to, so different hospitals may have different fundraisers that you can go to, help with. They always want patient stories to help aid in their fundraising, and she had a ball at this place. They lit around her. She was the queen of the night, and they just had a really good time. So I think stuff like that's really important. So this is really I like this picture a lot. The same boiling water that softens the potato hardens the egg. It's not about the circumstances, but rather what you're made of. So we're all given crazy circumstances, whether it's Pompe or cancer or anything else, if your dog passed away, anything like that is definitely where you grieve for. I think it's definitely what you're made of, and what you do with that is what's important. And I'm going to switch to a quick video, and I'm done. So this is Haley during an infusion. They have music therapy, art therapy, all this stuff during her infusion. This is when she did hospital infusions. She just started home infusions, which is really awesome. And this is her singing, if y'all have heard of Rachel Platten, the fight song. So her playing the ukulele with... And then we beeped right after that. Darn you, rates.
Thank you very, very much for this wonderful presentation. It's extremely informative for other parents. And I noticed that watching the movies and everything, I mean, there are always things you didn't know or you didn't realize or whatever. You did a beautiful job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we can take some questions from other parents if you want, if you think it was all very clear. You really did a wonderful job. Everything was understood.
We have one question.
Actually,
Oh, we do have a question?
I have a comment
Please.
actually. So, Krystal, as someone who's cared for Haley and from the Duke Pompe team, I just want to say something to you and to other families here.
Don't make me cry.
We feel as physicians that we are helping you, but honestly, when we see someone like Haley, I think she betters our lives. So I really want a round of applause for what you've done and the strength of the community, and what a marvelous young lady you have.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you very much. And honestly, the team has been amazing, and I'm not going to cry or anything right now. Suck it up. But we switched care to Duke after our doctor did not have any knowledge of Pompe, or very little knowledge. She was only patient. But the community and the involvement there and other places I know that are similar has been a huge, huge part of why she's doing the way she is. So thank you.
Okay, we switch to a completely different subject, gene therapy. It's always a little difficult to understand. So I've made 3 slides for a 3-minute introduction. Okay, I think everyone now knows about enzyme replacement therapy. So this is what is gene therapy in comparison to enzyme therapy. Right, here we have the DNA, your genes, genetic information. Call it an informative archive. It is a code of only 4 letters. A, T, G, and C. And they can be put in all kinds of different orders. So A followed by T followed by G gives you one piece of information. If you have an A followed by a C and then a G, you have a different type of information. There are 25,000 of these informative messages in your body. Those are called the gene, 25,000 genes. And the acid alpha-glucosidase gene is one of these 25,000 genes. Okay, based on the information in this gene, the body is able to produce 40,000 different products. And one of these products is acid alpha-glucosidase. And acid alpha-glucosidase is a protein, and it consists of different building blocks than the informative archive. And here the building blocks are called amino acids. And again, you have 20 different ones in this case. This is one, alanine, serine, leucine, all different ones. And you can have them in all different orders again. So if you have the alanine followed by a serine, by a leucine, you have a completely different product than when the leucine is followed by an alanine and by a serine. Now, what's the problem in Pompe disease? There is a mistake in the informative archive. So there is you don't have the correct information. There is a mistake. That's called a genetic defect or a mutation. So if you have the correct information, you make a correct product. If you have the wrong information, and patients with Pompe disease, they have the wrong information, you have shortage of acid alpha-glucosidase, here abbreviated as GAA, and the result is glycogen storage. So how to treat Pompe disease? You either try to correct the genetic defect, but that is impossible. So instead of correcting the genetic defect, you supply to the patient the correct information. Enzyme therapy is at this site. You have a shortage of acid alpha-glucosidase, so the treatment consists that you get a supply of acid alpha-glucosidase or an enzyme infusion. We do know how enzyme infusions work. We do maybe a little less aware how gene therapy works. So how do you supply a correct gene that is able to code for a correct protein? The methodology is this. You use a virus, this particle. And then I read, a vehicle is constructed carrying the normal human GAA gene. So you make this vehicle, and inside the vehicle you have a normal gene. And the vehicle is derived from a virus simply because viruses, they enter cells. If you get a cold, you get the virus enters the cells. So the virus enters the cells, and then after it has entered, it delivers the normal human GAA gene. And of course, when you have a normal human GAA gene, the production of normal acid alpha-glucosidase is secured. Then there are different types of viruses with different features. There is an adenovirus, just a name, maybe to remember, you will hear about it. There is another virus, it's called adeno-associated virus, abbreviated as AAV, and you can also use a lentivirus. These viruses have different features. They home to different cells. So one virus maybe goes preferentially to the liver, another one to the lungs or to the brain or to the muscle or whatever. And some of these viruses, when they have entered the cells, then either they put the GAA gene in between the pre-existing genetic information, so like you add a page to a book, or you have the page separate from the book. And in that respect also the different viruses, they vary. This is all I wanted to say about it, and the stage is now to 4 speakers, and the first is Andy Amalfitano.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to the AMDA for inviting me to speak today. I have a long title here. You can read it in the book. I'll just start out. First, I have no conflicts of interest, unfortunately. I wish I did, really, and I'll speak to that a little later. So gene therapy for Pompe disease, Dr. Reutzer, of course, did a great job. Here's a picture of one of those viruses. This is the one I'll be talking about. It's called adenovirus. It's just one flavor of virus. And what we're using is this virus to deliver the genetic information into cells. I like to think of it, I tell patients, it's like, think of the genetics as a cookbook. You know, it's got the information to make the acid alpha-glucosidase. And what we want to do is force the body to make the enzyme for our patients rather than Genzyme making it for you, is really what I'd like to do. So, we've done a lot of work on this. In fact, when I come to this meeting, I get emotional because it's been a long time. So first thing we ask is, well, this is a muscle disease. Why not deliver the cookbook into all the muscles of the body? Well, that's very difficult. Our bodies are designed to not allow anything into our muscles. So you could directly inject these viruses into the muscles, and we've shown that. Our work, Dr. Koeberl, you hear about others have done this, Dr. Byrne. You can do this, you can deliver into muscles, but it's very, very pointed, sort of localized effect. We'll turn you into pin cushions if we try to treat every muscle in your body. It's really not practical in my opinion. So we came up with a theory that maybe we could do the following. Could we use a virus to deliver that cookbook? What I did there, maybe I exceeded the weight limit because of all the pecan pie I ate for lunch. Anyway, what we'd like to do is, the premise here is, can we convert a liver, which is a normal secreting organ in our bodies, and force it by delivering a cookbook in there for the GAA protein and make it make so much, like bake so many cookies, that it actually secretes the enzyme out of the bloodstream, and now all the muscles get access to it rather than just one being stuck with a needle. Much like what you do now with enzyme therapy is what you're getting the enzyme injected right into your bloodstream. It's supplied by Genzyme. What we want to do is have your own liver supply it. So we know that this virus, as Dr. Reusser says, if you inject it into the vein, by nothing magical, it's actually anatomy, very simple 101. Your body doesn't allow anything to get anywhere except to your liver and spleen, so this virus homes to the liver. And the top liver here is not treated with virus. The liver on the bottom is treated with a virus that's delivering a recipe to make cells blue. So you can see we can turn that liver entirely blue with this virus. That's the entire liver. In fact, we can turn it black, it's so blue if we want, by upping the dose. So we have a rheostat by modifying the dose. So anyway, we've studied this a long time, like I said. Dr. Rabin, Dr. Plotz, graciously, they spent a lot of time making a mouse model of Pompe disease. And so we used this theory in these mice, and we showed a long time ago that, yeah, you could do this. The mouse's liver would produce a ton of enzyme. It would go to all the muscles, and here's the before treatment, and here's the glycogen. It's all pink, and within 12 to 18 days, we could see the glycogen clearing out of all these muscles in the heart and skeletal muscles, diaphragm. And we could actually demonstrate in mice that that would last a year. We've published that multiple times. Mice are not humans, right? We have humans that are rats, but we don't have. Mice are not humans, okay? So we need to think about moving beyond mice. They are limited for a lot of reasons, immunologically and anatomically. So we studied quails. You all know about the Pompe quails, and you know which one's affected here. And we showed that gene therapy, using the same premise, injecting into the vein of these quails, that we can get their livers to produce the enzyme to high quantity and secrete it to their enzymes. Still not enough. And so we wanted to go something very similar to humans, short of humans. So we've done studies now in baboons, and that's what I want to spend my time talking about, and you'll warn me when I get close to the end of my time here. So we use baboons. They're non-human primates. They have very, obviously they're evolutionarily very similar to us. They're similar immunologically, although not exactly, and they're large. They're not little mice. They're 833 times bigger than a mouse, right? So in order to move these technologies from a mouse to a human, you got to think of scalability. That's one of the reasons why we've always focused on a certain flavor of virus that I'm using in these studies. Now, the other reason that we wanted to do studies in baboons is that Genzyme actually did a study, this is published in 2011, where they were using a different flavor of virus and noticed that they went from mice to non-human primates, this is rhesus macaques, that they saw the effect of their virus didn't work as good. It was 1% as effective as what the results they were getting in mice. So this is another reason why we wanted to study this flavor of virus in the baboons, because we wanted to see if we would see the similar problem or not. And so we created an adenovirus that our favorite gene today is acid alpha glucosidase, and we engineered this and we put it into a virus. And in fact, this is a special virus because two things. One, it doesn't have any of the virus information in it that normally is in there. We've removed it all and replaced it with all our fancy ways to make this cookbook really read at high levels and spit out a lot of copies of this enzyme. We also did something else here. we made a baboon GAA gene, okay? And the reason why we did that is we know about CRIM status, and I've published papers on what happens in humans. We did not want these baboons to reject this enzyme because it was foreign if we used the human GAA, because there are differences. There's 35 of those amino acid differences that Dr. Reutzer talked about. So we made a baboon GAA and stuck it into one of these viruses. And first thing we did is we made it. Actually, we can make it fairly easily. This is not a difficult virus to grow. We got it on shelves. But we did inject it into mice first just to see if it worked. And we injected these mice, and this is just a study. This is actually 600 days after a single injection, and these mice began to immediately secrete GAA activity, and it lasted for 600 days. So we could see a single injection last a long time in the mice. So this is the way we did it in the baboons. We bring a baboon in, and this is in cooperation with Dr. Phil Eng and his colleagues at Baylor College of Medicine. What we did is we slip a catheter into the hepatic artery of the liver of these animals, and then we occlude with another catheter the inferior vena cava. Basically, we plugged up the liver, so we inject the virus in, it doesn't escape out. It kind of stays in there for a few minutes, allowing the liver to get a good dose of the virus and localized. And he's perfected this technique. So basically the catheters are inserted, the balloon's inflated. We injected 1 × 10⁻¹² viruses per kilogram of these animals. That's a high dose, okay? The reason we did that is we wanted to see if this works. So we didn't want to lowball these animals and waste them. And it takes only a couple minutes. And when we did this, what you can do is you can monitor the respiratory rate, the blood pressure, and the temperature. And you can see here in these 2 animals, when we inflate that balloon, their blood pressure drops, which is what's supposed to happen. Okay? So it was effectively to be able to do this and occlude the liver, and we injected the virus. In fact, after that, basically the baboons wake up and go back to their cages and start eating fruit treats again. They really had no problem with this procedure, and these are catheters and balloons that are typically used in humans today at probably across the street at the hospital. These are not some kind of crazy, machine or something. So here's what we found. First of all, if we look at the livers of these animals and we took biopsies through the treatment, out to 182 days, we could detect the virus in the liver of these animals out for 6 months at least. And one animal you can see here has slightly higher amounts of the virus in its liver than the other one. I think it got a better dose. The first animal had an aberrant kind of architecture to its anatomy. We weren't fully able to occlude it, but still we got the virus in there. If you do something called a Western blot, where you're actually looking for the protein, okay, so the actual recipe's making the enzyme, and we want to see it's in the liver. Here's liver biopsies, and we did Western blots on these animals and showed that, yeah, they are making acid alpha-glucosidase in their livers for at least 6 months. And they're producing the precursor form, which is very critical, because that's the form we want to see if it gets secreted into the blood. So we looked in the blood of these animals, and sure as heck, we saw GAA activity starting to increase. That you can see at about 7 days, we started detecting it. It goes up to about 15 days, started rising at 30 days, and this is out 6 months. So we had sustained GAA activity levels in the animals' bloodstream of both animals. You can see the red one is the one animal didn't get as good a dose, but still it's pretty high levels. These are approximately 1/3 of what we achieved in mice. And in fact, if you go on a virus per kilogram dose, we actually injected these baboons with 1/3 the dose that we injected in the mice. So it actually translated pretty well. We did Western blot of the plasma, and you can detect enzyme in the blood of these animals as well, so that activity correlates with protein. And I show this. You might think that this is the first time this has been done in animals, in baboons or non-human primates, but in fact, if you look back at that paper I mentioned from Genzyme, they actually created an AAV8 GAA expressing vector. This is a different flavor of virus, but expressing GAA. And here's the levels that we achieved with this adenovirus, measured by 3 different measures. This is the most conservative amount, 5,000 nanograms per mil. They achieved 55 nanograms per mil. This was the problem they had with not getting the high dose. So we feel like we've gotten a pretty good high stiff dose in the animals, and they produce GAA. If we look at activity levels now, you can see here's the liver of a normal untreated baboon. This is the normal GAA levels. Here's the 2 animals we treated. So obviously their livers are producing a lot of GAA. And if we look here, this is the part of the study that has me a little concerned. Here's skeletal muscle levels, here's heart. So here's a normal baboon's heart GAA level and skeletal muscle pretty low on this scale. Both animals certainly had enzyme in their muscles, in their heart muscles and tissues, but not as high as what we achieved in the mouse. Okay. 5 minutes? Oh, good. I'm going good. It's the caffeine. So anyway, so we've got this working, and we can get enzyme out for 6 months, single injection, and the muscles will take it up. Here's some studies looking at what happened when we injected the animals. You could see these are basically ALT, AST, LDH, CPK levels. We actually did a couple muscle biopsies here right at the time, so the CPK was elevated because of that. But we did see some transient rises in these liver functions at the time of injection of the virus. We injected a lot of virus into the liver, and the liver responded, noticed that we hit it with a virus at a pretty high dose. But these levels rapidly came down to normal, and the animals had no other problems after that. We looked at other blood parameters as well, trying to see if we see any problems, and I just circled here the platelet count we noticed was normal, and within 24 hours it dropped to about 100 or 125, where normal in a baboon is 150 to 500, and it quickly rose back up, and then the rest of the study was fine. They never had any clinical symptoms. Both animals here, I'm just showing those results. And then finally, just for the sake of this talk, we actually, because of those immune responses that I worry about, on the left here, these are graphics of looking at antibodies to the adenovirus that we injected, and clearly these animals had a response. They got immunized basically with this virus because they'd never seen it before. But if we look at GAA antibodies, minimal to low levels relative to the virus. It's not a perfect assay because we could only use human GAA in this assay. We don't have recombinant baboon GAA to use in this, what's called an ELISA assay. But so, I can't be 100% sure, but I think using the baboon GAA gene helped us avoid any immune responses to allow us to see what can maximally occur if everything kind of goes well. And so in summary, I think what I've shown is that we can safely deliver an adenovirus expressing the GAA gene into large non-human primates, 25 kilogram baboons. We actually made, like I said, the virus we made fairly fast. The study took a long time because we did one animal, then we did the next. We waited 6 months. I would like to have the data sooner, but we wanted to make sure we do things right. We showed long-term hepatic liver production of GAA, secretion of GAA for long-term, sustained plasma levels of GAA, and increased GAA activity in the cardiac and skeletal muscles. And we're still continuing to look at some peripheral tissues. I didn't show you, but we also have evidence that the diaphragm took up the muscle, or the enzyme as well. So I'll stop there. Here's the laboratory. A lot of people involved with this. David Rastel is a DO PhD student in my lab, and I've kind of saddled him with some of this work. I put his email up here. I wonder if some of the families or patients might email him and thank him, because I really made him work hard. And he's a genius. He is a genius. This kid's a genius. And if you can talk to him and get him to start working on Pompe, I'm telling you, he's just unstoppable. We have a lot of people. Dr. Phil Ang, Dr. Palmer down at Baylor made the virus. Texas Biomedical Research Institute is where we got the baboons. They actually, it was great, they cut us a deal because this was a gift funded by AMDA, okay? You paid for this study. And when I told them that, they usually charge you overhead rates and all kinds of things, basically would have doubled the costs, and they said, well, this is a gift, and we do these sort of studies when they're gifts and reduce the rates. So they contributed. Obviously, AMDA, thank you very much for paying for this. Osteopathic Heritage Fund, that's at my medical school, contributed to this. Genzyme and Sanofi supplied some of the recombinant GAA I used as a positive control on some of those blots. I would like to have thanked NIH for funding this, but they won't even look at a grant in regard to this. I would like to thank Genzyme for funding this, but they have not funded this. I would like to thank the Muscular Dystrophy Association. I've gone to them, they rejected this, okay? So AMDA, you did it. I thank you, and we'll just have to plan on what you think about this, look at everything, hear about it, learn about it, and maybe we can go forward. I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks again to everyone for inviting me to talk about our experience in human clinical studies of gene therapy for Pompe disease. We've been at this for a while. I'll try to give some context as to what brought us to this point based on the findings of the really important pivotal studies in enzyme replacement therapy, and thank you to Arnold for really explaining the difference. I'll use this as a pointer so it approaches both screens. So we know that there have been several critical studies completed and several underway to understand whether additional improvements in enzyme replacement therapy can impact the health and well-being of patients with Pompe. And additionally, there are other strategies that utilize new combination therapies such as pharmacological chaperones that impact the ability of the protein to remain properly folded when it's administered. And as Arnold described, gene therapy is an attempt to supply the functional gene for human GAA. And we've just completed a phase 1/2 or safety study in young children who had failed enzyme replacement therapy and became ventilator dependent. So I'll give you some brief overview of that, as well as tell you about 2 new studies based on a new agent that we first described in 2006, which has the potential to have widespread systemic effects. Andy just told you about adeno-associated virus. Sometimes these 2 agents are confused because they have a common name. AAV is a parvovirus. It's not part of the adenovirus family. It's a much smaller particle that piggybacks often in its life cycle with adenovirus and herpes viruses, and that's why it has this name of adeno-associated virus. The unique difference is that AAV for many years was not of much interest in virology because it's not a pathogenic virus. There have now been a discovery of many different serotypes that have different tissue tropism that impacts its ability to transfer genes into cells, and I'll highlight that issue in what is planned for the next clinical studies. And one of the unique things about AAV, a part of its regular life cycle, is it has the ability to persist in tissues, and the vectors very much mimic the life cycle of the virus itself. And there have been several clinical studies, including the one I'll show you in Pompe. But just to give you an idea of what happens when an AAV vector is injected either into the interstitial space or the blood, it binds to the outside of a cell, travels through the cell membrane to the nucleus where the other genetic material is contained, drops off the gene, and makes, in this case, the therapeutic protein, which is GAA. As I said, this process was conceived of really back early in the history of virology as one of the small DNA viruses that had the ability to stably integrate. And Ken Byrne at our institution first described the AAV vector genome. Nick Maziska conceived of it as a vector. Then Ken contributed another important finding that this is able to persist by integrating into the host cell genome. The vectors don't have that same ability, but persist in a different way. Then there was really a clinical era that was launched by several seminal findings related to different tissues. Bill Hausworth's work in the retina. In 1996, we described the ability of AAV to transduce muscle cells in essentially a permanent fashion, and a really important contribution of being able to mark cells with AAV using a marker gene called GFP. That clinical area is when we started our center in Florida, and then several pivotal trials followed. Terry Flott studied alpha-1 antitrypsin. Bill's program led to the first human study of AAV in the retina, which actually in many of those patients restored vision. Paul Hu, who's very involved in the Pompe space, did a really incredible study of aromatic amino acid decarboxylase deficiency in Taiwan. We've begun this Pompe trial, which is in 2010. And now the manufacturing capabilities of making this vector in large enough quantities are what's enabling the future of clinical work in this area. So this was the first paper to describe AAV expressing a therapeutic protein in muscle. When all those great slides were shown last night, Paul Kessler was here with me, I think, in 2001, and Paul was the first author of this paper. What we showed was that AAV expressing, in, like Andy showed, some marker genes or a therapeutic protein, in this case erythropoietin, were able to provide dose-dependent increases in protein expression in muscle, and that they essentially lasted the life of the cell. Now, in Pompe disease, we're interested in using these vectors because of one emerging idea is that not only the muscle disease contributes to the weakness, but it's really the motor unit that is problem. And the motor unit is comprised not only of the muscle cell itself, but the motor neurons that come from the anterior part of the spinal cord. And those motor neurons we know, as was alluded to earlier and very nicely shown by Barb in her presentation about pacing, if we can supplement this activity and solve the glycogen accumulation within the motor neurons, this was one of the goals of using these vectors because they deliver to muscle and transport themselves backwards into the nerve, through the nerve into the cell body. This is just an example of glycogen accumulation. This is a Genzyme publication that shows PAS staining in the motor neurons and this peripheral nucleus, which Barb also mentioned from that we've observed also in human autopsy specimens. But despite that problem, there was said earlier in discussing the natural history, there are no cognitive problems in the patients, and it was thought this pathology wouldn't be a problem or a barrier to success. And in fact, at least in the pivotal trial of protein replacement therapy in infants, in fact, it was a dramatic result on survival. But was really the survival in this patient population was mostly due to this beneficial effect of ERT, where the perfusion of the tissue is very uniform, and the enlarged heart at baseline impacts the ventilatory function and also the propensity towards heart failure. But when we looked not at the survival outcome, but the use of any assisted ventilation in the ERT population, we began to become concerned that here 4 out of the 18 patients in that trial began to use some form of ventilatory assistance. And when we looked in a more detailed way at some patients late after therapy, we saw that both in the US and the European population that there was still an unacceptably high rate of mortality as well as progression to ventilator dependence. So we looked at some functional characteristics of breathing, and the trial of AAV1 was kind of based on this finding that we knew that normal diaphragm descent was significant, the primary contributor to about 80% of ventilatory function, but even in a non-ventilated Pompe patient breathing independently, there's higher respiratory rates with minimal diaphragm excursion. So Catherine Ma in the lab began the work to develop a therapeutic vector even before this publication. This was the first publication where we looked at systemic dosing. But nicely, the whole acid alpha-glucosidase gene fits within the constraints of AAV. That is one feature of adenovirus. It can accommodate larger genes, but luckily for us, this truncated cDNA without a lot of the extra material on the beginning or the end fits just perfectly within AAV, along with a variety of different promoters. In this first experiment, we used a promoter that works in all tissues, and then studied the idea that AAV delivered into the muscle could influence the function of the phrenic motor neurons and of the muscle itself. Some of the preclinical evidence that supported this was the fact that we know that glycogen accumulates within muscle as the mice age. Here's the pink staining of the PAS for glycogen within muscle compared to the control. work that we did following up on the creation of this mouse model by Nina. And then we started to look more at the neuropathology to follow up on what was reported by Genzyme. And you can see within the sciatic nerve itself, nerve fibers are enlarged and abnormal. And the most unique feature that I think contributes to weakness here, as Barb alluded to, is the absence of co-localization of the presynaptic and postsynaptic components of the neuromuscular junction. And you can see here in the wild type versus the GAA knockout mouse, the absence of those, the joining of the nerve fiber and the muscle, which controls contraction. And in fact, Gary Todd in the lab recently showed that in 3 different age cohorts, when we look specifically at those neuromuscular junctions between wild type, knockout, and an AV9 treated animal, that one can recover the fact that a proportion of cells are denervated and recover function and remove glycogen from the muscle at an early age. But at the intermediate age, at 12 months, a greater proportion in the control animals are effectively denervated, that is, don't have postsynaptic terminals, but that is recoverable when at the same age, 6 months prior, they're treated with the vector that restores neuromuscular junctions and, in fact, restores force production in the tibialis muscle. But in the oldest mice, at 18 months, this proportion is not reversible, and we think this is due to the fact that there's a progressive loss of motor neurons in the animals. This is shown here, just again, the principle for the human studies, that the function in the nerve is restored. We confirm that in patients. So this is a neurophysiologic test in patients which demonstrated that the M wave amplitude is abnormal in Pompe patients. It leads to an altered spectrum at the muscle after contraction, and that can be used to assess outcomes in patients. So this led us all to the clinical trial. This is just a view of the diaphragm in the initial study dosing directly the muscle in a ventilated, full-time ventilated versus nighttime ventilated patient, and this is the last cohort of patients. You can see the improved condition of the diaphragm. And this study actually showed, just to make a synopsis of a few years of work, improved endurance post-treatment in all the subjects, and the last cohort of patients are now reaching their 1-year endpoint next month. So we will have analyzed those in conjunction with the earlier patients. What I really wanted to leave you with is the message that we've now, I think, reached the point of moving towards systemic therapy, not the localized therapy that I just described that had to be done in conjunction with ERT. This relies on, of course, the mouse model that Nina created. We have generated a rat model which shows more characteristic features of the infantile disease with early mortality, and we've also begun breeding the dog, which is a carrier of a single Pompe allele isolated from this Lapphund. In primates, we know that AAV9, as I mentioned, can lead to body-wide correction of a genetic defect. And one of the key features of being able to deliver the vector systemically is the ability to give it again. So because in this young patients, we know that they may need repeat exposure later in life. So we studied 3 patients who were receiving immune modulation for their enzyme replacement therapy, and when they were enrolled in the gene therapy trial, we found that all 3 of those on this regimen of rituximab and sirolimus remained naive to AAV and could not only avoid the complications of immune response, but potentially receive the vector again. We've studied now a group of primates that will enable a study in humans to look at this question of readministration. This is the preclinical data from the mouse expressing GA levels several times of wild type. And this is the descriptor for the clinical trial in adult patients, where we will include those with functional ambulation, adult onset, and look at safety as well as several important secondary outcome measures for the potential to redose. This study is described, as said, on clinicaltrials.gov, but I'll just give you the brief synopsis and then the plan for the future It will be the first randomized controlled blinded study of a gene therapy agent in adult patients, so we can do biopsies and other things we might not be able to do in children. But patients will receive the vector twice, one in the right leg, one in the left leg, and either leg receives the excipient in the opposite leg. And this is an attempt to hopefully confirm that this strategy will be useful in children. The regulatory pathway for this is a bit complicated. You can see we've completed some of the early studies, including next month the non-human primate study, and the first patient in this adult study is anticipated in May. That also will lead us to a systemic dosing study in children. This is supported by NIH and NHLBI. Additional primate studies are happening this year, and then the subsequent 2 years will look at this same test article, the same agent delivered systemically in patients 2 to 4 years of age. And then the really early identified patients will be candidates for a study being sponsored by Audentes. They have licensed the technology to date and have begun the clinical manufacturing for a study in infants to also in the coming year. And I think you'll hear more about that tomorrow from Suyesh Prasad. So I just want to thank the clinical team. Barbara talked earlier about diaphragm pacing, but she's also been a critical element of the gene therapy studies. I showed you the work of Manuela Corti, Darren Falk in the lab, David Fuller, as well as our team in producing vectors. And I just want to end kind of on a positive note. Sometimes we worry about all the problems, but you know, it is Halloween, so I thought maybe Snoopy would have something good to say. He said, someday we will all die. And then Snoopy said, that's true, but all the other days we will not. So I'll end there. Thanks.
But thanks to the AMD for allowing me to present some of our research toward gene therapy in Pompe disease. It's been a long road. You've heard from 2 experts, and I have the privilege of benefiting from their background information. I'd like to talk about what we've done with AAV vectors to develop a treatment for Pompe disease. And some special features really include that this treatment induces immune tolerance. What that means is it prevents the antibody response against GAA. And also we've done a fairly practical study about comparing gene therapy to ERT in the mouse model for Pompe disease. And then finally I'll mention what we would propose as a clinical trial design for gene therapy. And we know well that ERT has benefited a great number of patients with Pompe disease. It's extended survival in infants with this disease. But there are residual problems, and that's despite continuous treatment with ERT. And those include problems with breathing, as well as problems with walking due to muscle weakness. And so we'd hypothesized that gene therapy could improve the outcomes in Pompe disease in comparison with ERT. And we've done a number of experiments to develop gene therapy and to test this hypothesis. So this is a model for how gene therapy could work in comparison with ERT. And so if we look at the top graph, we would do a single intervention, in other words, inject gene therapy, as opposed to ERT, which, as everyone knows, requires repeated administrations every week to 2 weeks. And so the single intervention with gene therapy could help a young patient to develop normally, or at least have just as much benefit as from ERT, but with a single treatment perhaps every few years. Our approach has been to administer an AAV vector, as Dr. Byrne mentioned, but this vector would go to the liver, and it has a special control switch called a promoter that makes GAA only in the liver, and there are several advantages to that. So this GAA then, as Dr. Amalfitano showed, can go from the liver into the blood, be taken up in the muscle at the mannose-6-phosphoreceptor, and then traffic to lysosomes where it would be activated and reduce glycogen. So first I looked at literature sources because there had been several independent studies of both gene therapy, as we would propose it, and ERT. And Dr. Rabin had published several studies doing long-term ERT, 20 to 24 doses in her mouse model. And those are shown here, the GAA in the green marked bars, and then our gene therapy approach at a low dose, actually a low dose that might be considered for a first phase 1 clinical trial marked with red. So we can see that in the heart and the quadriceps, this long-term ERT raised the GAA slightly higher. It's very similar in the diaphragm. And then we've shown the untreated Pompe mouse and a wild-type mouse for comparison. So you can see that we're getting as much GAA as in a normal mouse. But what's more telling is actually the glycogen then in those relevant tissues. So in the heart, glycogen reduced really to normal levels, similarly in the diaphragm, near normal, and in the quadriceps, an equal benefit from either this low-dose gene therapy or from long-term ERT. We could also look at histology, and as you can see, the GAA knockout mouse model for Pompe disease has a very high accumulation of glycogen in the heart in the middle, all that staining. And then on your right, 12 weeks after giving the AAV vector at an effective dose, clearance of the glycogen. And then on the far left, you can see a normal heart for comparison. So the glycogen, which is very important to glycogen storage disease, was completely cleared. And this is for perspective. So we've studied both the muscle and the liver approach, if you will, to gene therapy. And so we've used those control switches, either active in liver or liver-specific, or in muscle-specific. And then I have columns here showing the minimum effective dose. In other words, the fewest number of vector particles where we can expect to see a response. And we could see this approach with the liver-specific switch or promoter is 5-fold more effective than the muscle-specific promoter. And then in the middle column, if we look at highly effective dose, so where we're really clearing the glycogen from the heart, from other muscles, there is a 10-fold difference with the advantage being towards the liver-specific promoter or the liver-targeted approach. And then a fourth column, the immune response is really key here. So we and others have realized that this liver-specific introduction of a foreign protein like GAA in Pompe disease can prevent the antibody response, which is, we know, critical to getting the full benefit. Whereas muscle expression of GAA and other proteins consistently provokes an antibody response. And we know that in the situation where it is muscle-specific, if we suppress those antibodies, that the benefit is greater. So those antibodies are really relevant. I wanted to talk a little bit more technical information about how this prevention of antibodies or induction of immune tolerance to GAA works in Pompe disease. So what we've learned. And here's the basic model where if we give a protein or AG for antigen repeatedly to a mouse that doesn't make that protein, like the mouse with Pompe disease getting GAA, then we get immunity and antibody formation as shown in A. And in contrast, if we give our AAV vector that expresses GAA only in liver, as in B, that prevents the antibody response. We can give the GAA again and again, and there's no antibodies. And what were the results of that, modeling that? So here's our experimental design in the upper left, and we had 4 groups. One didn't receive any treatment, just an injection of water. The next received 6 doses of ERT. The third, a low dose, again a low dose of AAV that expressed GAA only in liver, the liver specific. And then we combined the 2 treatments to see the effect of preventing the antibodies upon ERT in these mice. So first off, these mice made no GAA, and we know that when they make antibodies, they have a hypersensitivity response to ERT. So the upper right here is a mouse that just received an injection of ERT but has formed antibodies, and you can see it doesn't look very well. In fact, a number of those mice didn't survive till the end of the experiment. Whereas the mice pretreated with AAV that hadn't formed antibodies is very well appearing and had no reaction. If we look down here, quantifying the mice that either received ERT alone, these bars show how high the antibody response was, and a very low or absent response if they received AAV first. And certainly the antibodies formed here weren't enough to cause any problem. If we look at glycogen staining of the heart again, so we've given a low dose of AAV that we knew wouldn't clear glycogen from the heart, but it did prevent antibodies. So when we layered on the ERT, we have a very nice clearance of glycogen. This is an example then of what we call an immunomodulatory therapy that prevents the immune response and makes the standard of care ERT more effective. And here's the model how that's working immunologically. The liver-specific expression producing GAA only in the liver on the right actually induces special cells called regulatory T cells, or Tregs. And those also go places like the spleen, where they suppress T cells called CD4 positive helper cells, and then we didn't get antibody responses. So this mechanism is very well known. If we deplete the Tregs first, we do get antibodies, even though we made the GAA only in the liver. So those Tregs are key cells to this effect. To summarize then, so it's the liver-specific GAA that induced the immune tolerance, prevented the antibodies. If we combine that with ERT, we got a better effect from, again, the standard ERT, and that both elevated the GAA in muscle and lowered the glycogen content. I didn't show you, but it did improve the muscle function in those mice. And we understand the mechanism somewhat, in that it involves these special regulatory T cells to specifically prevent antibodies against GAA. So here's a new experiment that we've just done, and it's fairly simplistic, but again, we're looking at our minimum effective dose of gene therapy. We're comparing it with a standard ERT or no treatment in the mice with Pompe disease. And we tested the mice before and after 1 month of treatment, and then we collected tissues to measure GAA and glycogen. Here's the design. Again, the first row is 4 weekly doses of ERT. The second row is just the gene therapy. Third row, untreated. And the wire hang test we did at the beginning and end to show the difference in their muscle strength. So we can see first off, actually, the mice that received ERT, actually a couple of them didn't survive. And again, that's related to the hypersensitivity, despite our best efforts to prevent that by giving Benadryl. All the mice with AV survived. Then if we look at wire hang, so we're looking at the decrease in wire hang over a month, and it was quite dramatic in untreated mice. ERT didn't really prevent it, and it's looking more promising with AV. More importantly, though, let's look at GAA. So if we look at GAA activity in these different tissues after 1 month, AV produced a higher GAA level, more effectively correcting the deficiency in liver, in heart, in the diaphragm, really uniquely in the quadriceps muscle, because ERT is known not to be very effective in skeletal muscles like the quadriceps, and AAV, again, at this low dose, was increasing the GAA activity. More tellingly, if we look at the glycogen content, both ERT and gene therapy lower the glycogen content of the heart, but in the quadriceps, that skeletal muscle, AAV uniquely lowered the glycogen content, whereas ERT did not. So why is gene therapy looking better? And so a simplistic model is that we're continuously producing GAA. It's going through the blood, shown by this increased GAA activity in the blood after gene therapy, whereas in ERT there's one shot every week or every 2 weeks, and we know from studies published by Amicus and other investigators and experiments in our own lab that ERT you inject disappears quickly. And the other fact that's very important is that this liver-targeted gene therapy prevents the antibody response that we did see, a high antibody response shown here to ERT. And again, it validates our model where these cells, special Treg cells, prevent the antibody formation following gene therapy. So, secondly, we have talked with the FDA. We've planned a study to get clearance to go ahead with a clinical trial. And here is just one result. Actually, this is the design where we had to study different groups of over 220 mice in total. What we found is mice that were treated with the AAV vector had significantly lower glycogen, these groups 4, 5, 7, and 8, in their heart, diaphragm, even in quadriceps. And group 6 was the mice that just received ERT. So again, looking superior to ERT in this study. Also, there was a lack of any toxicity. The CK, which is a marker for muscle damage, actually decreased over the course of the study. Now on quickly to the clinical trial design that we would propose. It's very similar to other designs that you've heard. In a first phase study, the objective is to understand the safety of the treatment. And so this would be a very low dose given to adult patients with late onset Pompe disease. However, we would try to tease out if there was an effect and also if there's any benefit. So we would measure GAA and glycogen in the muscle. We would look at antibody formation, and then we would measure standard things, muscle strength and respiratory function. This would be a 1-year study. We would use the vector that I've talked about today. That would be given early on, within 2 weeks of entry into the study, once we determined that the patients would be likely to respond to it. And there would be a muscle biopsy early, and then at 3 months later, again, to quantify GAA and glycogen. The inclusion criteria are very standard. As Dr. Bali discussed, a confirmed diagnosis of Pompe disease, adults who can give written consent, and they would continue receiving ERT after they'd been taking it, receiving it for over a year. So they're very stably treated with standard of care ERT, and they continue that during this early phase clinical trial. Just a brief tangent. This has been done in hemophilia B, with an AAV8 vector very similar to what we are talking about. It's a serious disease. You can see it by the bleeding into the joints here. And these patients need repeated injections of a protein, therapeutic protein. So we would have a very standard increase in dose in 3 steps during a clinical trial, analogous to what's been done in hemophilia. You can see over here the benefit, the increase in the factor IX levels that was seen in this dose escalation, and our effective dose for Pompe disease would be right here in the middle. So we're optimistic that this early phase trial should show some benefit, at least increasing GA activity in the muscle. And just to summarize then, we're proposing this clinical trial. It's a liver-targeted gene therapy. It mimics the successful trial in hemophilia B that's been underway 5 or 6 years. We use standard endpoints for Pompe disease. Here's our team, thanks to people in the laboratory, to leadership at Duke, to current collaborators, to sources of funding, especially to the GTRP, Gene Therapy Resources Program, without whose resources we couldn't have done that farm tox study in 220 mice. Here are my conclusions, and I'll stop for any questions.
Okay, I'm going to talk about indeed another type of virus, lentivirus. Yes. And to start with, why are we doing this? I think it's clear that enzyme replacement therapy is working and that we are not completely satisfied. We want to improve this and provide other types of therapy. And this is one option. One of the major problems with ERT are immune responses, and also what's becoming apparent is the blood-brain barrier cannot be passed. Of course, it's very expensive and invasive as well. So the idea of lentiviral stem cell gene therapy is in this cartoon, and the idea is that for the future then, that bone marrow stem cells, hematopoietic stem cells, will be taken from the patient, will be expanded here in vitro, and the lentiviral particles shown here will be used to transduce those cells, so they will enter these cells, and they contain the healthy GAA gene, make the protein, and this can be checked, and then the cells, after like a very few short period, can be transplanted back into the patient. So actually this is a normal bone marrow transplantation with the variation that the cells that are taken now from the patient itself and corrected with a lentivirus. So what I'm going to tell you here is the work that has been done using a mouse model for Pompe disease. So it's all preclinical, and we are trying to optimize this, to improve this, with the aim to make this happen for human patients. So we have our own Pompe mouse actually, of which we can do exactly the same. So we take the hematopoietic stem cells, HSCs here, they are transduced with the virus and transplanted back. So just one step back, what is lentiviral gene therapy actually? What we are doing here, and that's a major difference with the AAV therapy that you have seen in previous talks. So we are going to take the gene, the GAA gene, and the lentivirus will insert this gene into the DNA of the host cell. And that's the difference. With AAV, it will not insert the DNA in the host DNA, it will stay outside that. And it's important to realize that the safety issues are important here. We cannot control with this method where the virus will be inserted, so this is important. Having said that, there are now clinical trials ongoing with the current versions of lentiviruses that we use, and they look very promising, also the safety aspect of that. And here are the two major trials that I can mention here. One for metachromatic leukodystrophy, both are from the group of Luigi Naldini, and the other for Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome. So the first results have been published here in Science, 2 publications in 2013 already. And so far, these patients that are in these trials are not having major problems. And I think that's very promising and very important. We are using a similar lentivirus. It is important, though, to test this for each individual disease because there are always different conditions. How many viral particles do you need? How many GAA protein do you need to correct the gene, the disease? So I show you what has been developed in the laboratory so far. And this work has been published in Blood already in 2010. And this is an approach where the lentivirus was used to express a normal GAA gene as we know it, as we all have it in our genomes. And that was actually very nice. So you can see here some of the results where actually this is a pus staining, and you can see here that this is a quadriceps, for instance, where there's a pus staining of a control virus here with a lot of positive staining. So this is the muscle, and here you see correction. But we also see that the correction is not full, it's not complete, but it was very promising. If you measure glycogen levels, here on the right, you can see here glycogen in the wild type of obviously mice. There's no glycogen. This is GFP, this is a control, so this is a lentivirus without a GAA gene. So the white bars, and there you see a lot of glycogen in the heart, diaphragm, etc. And when you treat with the lentivirus containing a normal GAA gene, then the glycogen is reduced in all these cases. It's not complete, but it's reduced. So this was very nice. I also have to tell you that this approach is potentially giving a lifelong treatment. If you have the gene in your DNA, you will not lose it, and that's it for the rest of the life of the mice. And I show you this movie, actually coming from this experiment. This is called a rotarod, where on the left, first you see a mouse that has been treated with this therapy, and on the right you see a mouse that has not been treated. You can see what happens. So you can see that on the left the mouse actually is able to stay there, and on the right the muscles are too weak, and the mouse is not able to grab this thing and to stay on it. And this is one of the tests that has been used in the laboratory. You can see the effect is quite dramatic. So from this, to summarize, this looked promising. We got quite some clearance of glycogen in most tissues. It was not complete. Another part, which I'm not going to elaborate here, is that we got immune tolerance actually to ERT, which is an important benefit also here. But we wanted to improve this further to bring this, to make this potentially possible for the clinic. And one of the next steps was actually to make a different version of the GAA gene. So this is not a normal version as we have it, but it's called a codon optimization. And the codon optimization actually makes the gene more efficient. So you can make more protein from the same gene. And that's actually, here's then on top the lentiviral construct. And here you can see GAA-CO. And this was actually an important step forward. So in this experiment, the normal gene GAA is compared with the GAA-CO, or codon optimized. And on the left you see the activity of the enzyme GAA, and on the right the glycogen in tissues. And you can see that the codon-optimized version provides higher enzyme activities here in black, and also provides a better glycogen clearance, because here you hardly see any glycogen left. So it could completely remove glycogen from tissues. So this was an important step. And of course, there are all technical details that you have to think about here, how many copies of the virus are inserted, etc. A major point now, you could say, okay, you're done, bring it to the clinic, why would you wait? Well, one important thing is this part of the virus. It's called the SSFV promoter, or the SF promoter. Actually, this is the part of the virus that drives this gene. It's important to make the gene active, and it does a job so good that it is potentially also dangerous. And that's, for the safety authorities, a reason to actually not be very happy about this promoter, and therefore we are testing other improved versions right now, and I'm going to show one other option. And this is one of the other options, and this is making use of also improvements in the field where the targeting of muscles can also occur via a different mechanism. So you can see here the mannose 6-phosphate receptor, which is actually the IGF-2 receptor, and also has a different binding domain. So you should know that normally GAA is taken up by skeletal muscle and other tissues via this receptor, and via little modifications called glycosylations, or mannose 6-phosphate, as shown here, M6P, modifications on this protein. So the protein is a little bit modified in the cell, and that enables it to enter target cells. But what you do here is actually you make a different version of the protein. You attach a little group to it here, a part of the IGF-2 actually, and that enables it to bind to another part of the same receptor. So now it's glycosylation independent. So therefore it's called GILT, glycosylation independent lysosomal targeting, and the rationale is that the uptake by tissues is then enhanced. And that's here visualized. So, of course you can combine it with the GAA codon optimized version, and that's been done here. So here you see the new virus with the codon optimized version, and then this other part attached to it, the IGF-2 part. And we are currently testing also this version, and this version shows actually a very good clearance as well. And it looks actually better compared to the one without this tag. So here you see, for instance, glycogen clearance, and this is actually at the very low copy number of the virus. Why is this important? Because if we can increase the activity of this part, you might be able to switch this promoter to a weaker promoter, which is potentially safer in a clinic. And that's, I think, an important reason why this is now an interesting experiment. And here you see an example of that. So a PGK promoter is one of those options that is allowed in clinical trials right now. And this might be an option if you combine the PGK promoter with this new version of GAA, codon optimized, and the IGF-2 part. We show here actually that it can work to a certain extent, and of course that depends on the amount of copies of the virus that you put into the cells. We are currently testing other promoters as well that are known to be allowed for clinical trials. So this is actually where we are standing right now. So the goal of the whole effort here is to get high activity of GAA enzyme expressed using a lentivirus and using a method that is acceptable to the regulatory authorities. The SF promoter is a problem, and therefore different promoters are tested right now. we can use a codon-optimized version of GAA and the glycosylation independent lysosomal targeting version is another option that can enable a better uptake, potentially. Well, right now this is important preclinically to define a good combination and a good balance between safety and efficacy. And when we have the results of those experiments, which are ongoing right now, we will prepare for clinical testing in the near future. So this work is actually started in a group of Gerard Wagemaker and several people here at hematology at the Erasmus MC, and is now being further brought into the lab and further by Chusi Liang in our center, with many people here involved, with Ans and some other people here, Merel and June, and there are some collaborators here which are also important. I don't know whether there's a lot of time left. If there is, there's no time? 1 minute? I could stop here. I could also talk a little bit. Yeah, I have actually a lot of explanatory or other slides about this technology. Maybe there's one thing I wanna draw your attention to, and that's the really preclinical work by using gene editing, and you can avoid using a lentivirus by putting a gene exactly where you want it. And to make a long story short, I just show you one example of this patient, which is now in clinical trial. This is Timothy Brown, and he is a HIV patient, was HIV patient. Actually, he got cancer, he got leukemia, and then received a bone marrow transplant from a donor that happened to have a mutation in this gene, CCR5. And that's a receptor for the HIV virus. And he was actually cured by receiving this bone marrow transplant. And this actually initiated a clinical trial where gene editing was used, or is used, to knock down or to inactivate this gene specifically. So you have complete control of what you do with the genome, and that's the new phase actually that we are entering, at least in the lab, but as you can see here, also in the clinic. And hopefully this is going to be very successful. Thank you.
Thank you also for sharing this preliminary data. It really shows what the future can bring. Can I have all speakers up here? Because now we have a discussion. Andy, you're the first here. Can you comment what the future could be? Can you please?
Yeah. One thing I think is that all the things that you just learned about are not mutually exclusive. Okay? We could actually combine these things at some level in the future. You know, one might work for a while, then you move to the other one, or combine them. So that's one thing that's really nice about what's going on here, is that in fact these alternative methods may not be the home run, but together we might have to do that combined with ERT. That may be in effect what happens here. Just like cancer chemotherapies are built upon successive sort of generations and what we learn. So, but as far as what I talked about, adenovirus and using it in human clinical trials, the problem is not the cost, although clinical trials are very expensive for producing the virus or producing it rapidly. It's the actual ability of FDA or Europeans to accept the use of this virus in humans, because in other genetic diseases there have been some problems that likely, you know, depending on your bias and how you view it, you might attribute to the virus. I don't. That's based on my scientific and physician opinion. I don't think it's a bad one. But be that as it may, it's going to be more difficult. It may be that the baboon study sort of set the bar for what you might expect in a human study, and we can see what some of the other vectors can do once they do enter clinical trials, and then go from there. That's my thought.
Nina has a question. Nina has a question.
One question, and then you comment on this. Yeah, thank you. Nina? Dr. Raven.
General consensus that AAV is much better. Wouldn't it make sense?
Can you repeat that?
AAV, which seems to be, yeah. Wouldn't it make sense to combine efforts to go with AAV gene therapy? Everything else is intellectual exercise is very interesting, no question about it. All the talks were very interesting, but isn't it that it looks like it's,
So maybe I could amplify on one point. I think when you hear about liver-directed gene therapy, it also relies on the experience of the RT to achieve cross-correction of cells distant from where the protein's made. So we have experience to some degree with that, other than the beneficial effects of expressing a protein in hepatocytes, which leads to, as Dwight said, an important aspect of acceptance of that protein. But I will make one point, which maybe Arnold will comment on, is the notion that cell-autonomous correction has the greatest efficiency of any of the means of getting a lysosomal protein from the Golgi into the lysosome. And so the approach that we're considering takes advantage of that, actually relies on that, especially when you consider the need for access into neurons and other parts of the central nervous system. So cell-autonomous correction, or correction of each cell, is a key feature of taking advantage of the efficiency of what the natural gene would do and what the natural processing of the enzyme undergoes, which is quite different than when it reaches the cell surface and has to be internalized.
Dr. Koeberl, can you comment, because your approach is very similar to the one of Dr. Byrne?
So that's a nice point, that the cell autonomous correction expressing GA in muscle might be more efficient, but actually due to the tropism of the virus for liver, which you're well aware of, producing enough GAA to very effectively clear glycogen from many, many muscles takes a lower dose of AAV when you treat the liver than when you try to transduce every muscle. So there are other muscle diseases that are candidates for AAV vector-mediated gene therapy, like muscular dystrophy, and it's well recognized in the field that there are major hurdles to delivering the gene to every skeletal muscle, which would be required for that cell autonomous correction. So it's kind of controversy still, and I think we don't have consensus.
Well, but you do agree with Dr. Amalfitano's approach to use the liver as a...
No consensus, though.
As a source. Well, no consensus, but not with respect to the type of a virus, but with respect to using the liver as a source.
Yeah. And we've done experiments, actually, just one more second. We've used the strongest, if you will, muscle delivery and the strongest liver delivery, and the liver prevails every time. And this is based on multiple published studies, and I think agrees with other work, say from Genzyme.
And
one more question. Okay. Yeah, irrespective of muscle delivery or liver delivery, in all the experiments which I've seen, why is it with a very high level of enzyme in the circulation, and what seems to be a high level, a much better level of the enzyme in skeletal muscle compared to ERT, you still don't have a complete glycogen clear? What's the reason for that? It's always significant amount of residual glycogen in skeletal muscle, no matter what you do.
I'll take a quick pass at that one. We know that the mannose-6-phosphoreceptor is not highly expressed in skeletal muscle. In fact, it's expressed less there than in heart or liver, as your laboratory showed. So that receptor is limiting to take up GA from the blood, and we found when we increase that receptor with beta-2 agonists that we get a much better correction, almost a complete clearance of glycogen from muscle. But it's really dependent upon the G activity you can achieve in muscle, and we have new experiments unpublished that show if you deliver enough G activity in muscle, you clear glycogen, as suggested by some of the work I showed today, but we have unpublished data that really doesn't show that.
Dr. Pijnappel, do you agree? Because you had this extremely high, unusually high expression in the blood, and I had the impression that all the glycogen was gone in the muscle.
Yeah.
Did I misinterpret?
No, so you can completely clear it with this therapy, but it's true that you need extremely high blood levels. And funny enough, I think the targeting also is very important, how it comes into the muscle cells, because there's not always a correlation between activity and glycogen clearance, actually. Between the two factors that I showed, for instance.
To your point, I agree, because in fact, when the muscle itself expresses the protein and not through cross-correction, there is complete clearance of glycogen, and that one of the key differences of this concept of hepatic-derived expression versus cell-autonomous expression is still the acceptance that there is a key aspect of the disease is related to neural dysfunction. So that's not going to be influenced by liver-mediated gene transfer, because we know that ERT doesn't penetrate the CNS, and neither does, especially if the restricted expression is just in the liver. So that's, again, probably related to the efficiency of the system. But it's true that it's exactly as Dwight says, that gram for gram, the liver is a professional secretory organ. It makes more GAA, but that's not necessarily going to achieve the same functional outcome if the cell autonomous route is used.
In our studies actually that we co-authored, we showed that we drove glycogen nearly down to baseline normal levels if we achieved high enough GAA levels in the blood. So that's why I emphasize the amount that's produced in these primates. Your first question about, not used to this. Your first question about why just go with AAV, right? I hear that, but I don't think you noticed the graph I showed you, which compared the amount of the blood levels produced in a baboon by an adenovirus versus what Genzyme published with an AAV, which was 100 times higher. And I just told you that it takes a lot of enzyme to clear glycogen, hence that's why I showed the data. So I don't think it's a consensus. I do think that there's issues regarding safety of an adenovirus, but I'm talking about the data. And so we can look at the numbers, and I'll publish this data, and you can look at it for yourself and then decide what you think the likelihood that a trial may work or not based on those sorts of quantitation, which is absolutely required. And that's why we spent so much time trying to do that, because I don't feel like just coming in and saying we got some activity, how much, how long, how high. Those are the questions we have to ask. That's my answer to this.
Wait a minute. See, because already I think all gentlemen agree and disagree with you that if you have high enough expression, you're able to clear glycogen completely from the muscle. I heard,
Almost complete.
And I think that's the same with ERT, because if when you dose the mice with 100 milligram per kilogram, it does clear after. It doesn't in your mice maybe, but it does in ours. For sure. And our mice are equally sick, I can assure you. Anyhow, there's still some disagreement. That's good, because otherwise there's no discussion. If we all agree, go.
I wanted to
just
just add, respond to the question about correction of the nervous system. So. Again, the mannose-6-phosphate receptor is critical to that cross-correction, and we've shown in experiments adding the beta-2 agonist to ERT or to gene therapy lowers glycogen content in the brain, which is the ultimate target for the central nervous system.
We can take one more question, and if there's a question by any of the patients or people from patient association, they have priority, and if there isn't any from them, then it's, yeah, all right. So Hans, you lost your chance. Alan, yeah, sure.
Just from patient standpoint, time frame on this whole.
Hi, Alan Muir, UK. I want to ask a very stupid question, but about the way you refer to glycogen clearance. Because any sportsman or aspiring sportsman wants a lot of glycogen in his muscle, and you will talk about glycogen clearance in the muscle. You're talking about glycogen clearance in the lysosome, are you not?
Well, yeah. If the word glycogen clearance is used in this audience, it's always clearance of glycogen from the lysosomes. And If you have other reserves of glycogen, to act, and you will never exhaust those. It's only the lysosomal glycogen that is there in excess, and we're talking about the
Yeah, thank you. Well, I wanted to make sure that you weren't getting rid of all of glycogen. Because there are marathon runners in here, you know. They need.
Yeah, not me though.
We have another question over here.
Yeah, do we?
Just from a patient standpoint, what's time frame for all this to develop? Are we talking 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Where just your personal feelings on it?
So I can comment because I tried to show the complexity of the multiple steps in the regulatory pathway. Not only must one complete the preclinical studies, also mice and sometimes in primates, but have manufactured the clinical product and be prepared to present all of that information to the FDA. So once it's presented to the FDA, they actually have 30 days to respond. And then subsequently, or either before that moment or before or after, institutional review boards or ethics boards approve or modify the proposal. So in the case of the adult study, it's anticipated to start in the spring. So after it's been presented to the FDA. So it's initially shown to them in a preview meeting, and then when all the product is produced and the non-clinical studies are well understood and produce final reports, then it's presented to the agency. So we think in April. The subsequent study in infants will probably be a few months after that, but it's very closely related.
But maybe people also want to know when this will be marketed like enzyme replacement therapy, so not only the trial, so then we are talking in terms of how many years?
Yeah, so it's
6,
important
10?
to put that in context. I can make a comment about that because after the many years beyond trying to understand this ability of AV to transduce muscle and result in production of therapeutic protein, the EMEA was the first to approve a therapy in 2012. And that was after it was first described in '96. So you get an idea of the length of time. That product originally failed when presented to the EMEA, and another company brought it forward and won approval. And that's actually the very first and currently the only gene therapy product approved in the Western world. So there are no approved products in the U.S., and there are believed to be, that's not until there's public hearings about it, but there are believed to be some applications for approval right now. And studies that are being designed are not only safety studies, they're being designed as potential approvable studies. So the later phase 2 or phase 3 studies. So I think this field is moving very quickly, and if it's not in Pompe, there are other programs in Duchenne and in hemophilia and retinal diseases that will, within a short period of time, 2 to 3 years, given that the applications have already been made and theoretically additional studies could be done if needed, that we will see approvals in the U.S. and certainly additional approvals in Europe.
Yeah.
So it's not 10 years away.
Can you make a prediction, 5 years, 10 years, 1 year, or never?
So the lentiviral gene therapy approach, of course, is a little bit different. I think there's a huge benefit from the current studies, current clinical trials that I just showed, and this really, I think, should enable the start of a clinical trial rather soon. That should be fine if we manage to convince with the current experiments to do that.
But also for Pompe disease, you think?
Yeah, I'm very positive about it. Yes.
Yeah, Andy?
I would never predict.
Okay.
I would never predict, no, because it's got to work, and there's a lot of challenges here. So to say 3 years, 5 years, whatever, I think is kind of, and especially because we have patients in front of us here. So these trials are difficult and long and expensive because you have to ask the question scientifically, did it truly change something significantly that warrants the risk of having someone shoot a virus into you with some foreign DNA? So that's why I used to try and predict, and all bets are off. So what we're trying to do, I think all of us, is trying to temper our tone We're trying to show positive. At the same time, there's a lot of, we're fairly conservative, I think, all of us, in regards to not overstepping, because we don't want you to come back in a couple of years and say, hey, I thought you said 2 years. What happened? You know?
So I only say that because there's so many active studies, and not necessarily about, I'm not referring necessarily to anticipated positive results in the Pompe world. There are many completed late phase studies in other conditions, like I mentioned, eye diseases and hemophilia. But when you consider specifically Pompe and you have commercial partners that now are in this space, there's an